Right, hello everybody, welcome back, and we'll get started. Now, when Carol introduced herself yesterday, he said that one of his missions was to, I think if I quote you rightly, sabotage the curriculum. And today's talk is going to be from the curriculum to the classroom. How do you make a curriculum really work to the best advantage of students? A key point for, I think, any teacher, particularly if the curriculum is quite narrow or quite rigid. And also he's going to be looking at the special case of Transylvania. We're gradually homing it in on where we are now.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank to our dear hosts, to the Ratzer Foundation, to Pamela and Nikolai, for ever being the wonderful hosts they always are, for the venue which enabled us to exchange ideas and become better in our profession. So it was very interesting to see how this issue of identity is, sorry, I'll say it, how this issue of identity is in accordance or is in accord with national curriculum. Because identity is a very complicated thing. It's perceived very different. The things I would like to, I try to be as fast as possible. Okay, this is what I will try to present to you as a stepping stone for debate and personal reflection. Why is it important to teach about identity? And identity is always maybe the archetypal sensitive issue. At least for three reasons, I think it is important to focus on that when teaching. Historians, first of all, we are part of society, and we usually answer to questions that are put by society. It is a somewhat dear mystification, the fact that we're researching because we're interested. We're interested because we're perceiving signals from the society. Actually. Second, this is my personal belief. If historical research would be to repeat what other people have said, it would be boring. I wouldn't do it. So actually, we are always in search of our professional identity, of our new questions and things that make us feel comfortable by research. And as a matter of point, all teachers are actually researchers because they have to research their students. It's much more complicated than to look at the classroom and really understand what is happening there. It's as complicated as working with an archival fund. Identity has regained a very interesting posture right now throughout the intellectual world, but also in politics, in economics. In the late 1980s, people thought that the economic hero of a nation like Ford or I don't know, Krups, were vanquished. Right now, what is happening with artificial intelligence is the resurgence of the so-called economic heroes of a nation. So, identity is a new buzzword. Also, identity focuses also on multi-perspectivity, because identities are always, the word should be always a plural. Okay, and I'm starting from two quotations. One from Fukuyama, who wrote a book. They're not big. I always like hard copies. It's not big. And he wrote this book in reaction to He wrote this book in reaction to the first Trump election. He said, no way. And he started to look, why did Trump win the election. And he found out that it is the issue of identity. And he links identity with the new wave of nationalism. At least in an American context, I think he might be right. Because I have this quote from a person involved in an Enola Gay exhibition and the entire debate concerning the role of the atomic bomb and how is subjective memory related to that. And one of these, Kamen was a leading historian of the military branch, let's say. But nevertheless, he wrote this: historians become controversial when they do not transmit the received unconventional wisdom, perpetuate myths, when they challenge the comforting presence of a stabilized past. Members of a society and its politicians in particular prefer that historians be quietly ironic, remembering only, rather than polemical, conservators rather than innovators. Because true, as I said before, we are in a constant dialogue. So these are the things that made me ponder several issues. But at the same time, as a teacher, I think the sensitive issues are very teachable moments, are very useful for various reasons. They trigger emotional responses, and it is rather well established the fact that emotions are crucial in memory. Okay. The problem is the management of emotional responses, but they are always there. Also because, and related to that, identity history and identity politics, another buzzword in the last decades, tend to be personal. There is only one person with whom we live the most, and it's ourselves. So identity is also related to persons, and our students tend to be very personal. Sensitive issues question common wisdom, established facts. They enable us to focus on the why and the how, not only what. And these are two crucial questions if we want to make history an explanatory science. And of course, they question stereotypes and models, keeping in mind that stereotypes are unavoidable. It's important we are aware of them, but we can't avoid them because they're part of how our brain is hardwired. Now, the word. Again, Fukuyama. He established, he's one of the first who makes a link between person and larger personal identity and larger identities. Because we're usually thinking in terms of group identities, but fundamentally, it's about us, each of us, okay? And he tells, his point is that there's the issue of dignity. Without quoting him, he recollects Maslow's pyramid of needs. The topmost is self-recognition, being comfortable in one's own skin. And basically Fukuyama, with his tools, does the same thing. He tells us that, well, we need dignity, and our identity is based on dignity. But he goes further, and he says, in a Platonic vein, that actually dignity, from which identity stems, is themos, the third part of the soul. That part that acts is related to emotions and values and craves recognition. Okay? It's not as simple, follows from him. There are two types. Isothymia, which means recognized equal worth, possibly by my peers. But Veritas, again, I'm pretty sure he came to this idea against Donald Trump. Megalothymia, recognition, superior worth. Because his point is that Donald Trump is victim to megalothymia, not understanding the first part. Okay? So we need to be recognized as having the same worth, and sometimes to be regarded as superior. But he tells us a very crucial thing. For each who has megalothymia, there are a lot of other people who lose isothymia. So there's a question of balance between individual and collective. So value becomes, because the entire debate is related to values, value become a positional good. The recognition, which makes me to have a certain identity, is positional. If I'm recognized, I'm accepted, then I feel good. It is something that somebody else might not have. I'll come back to that because I will try to look at identity as dialogical. Okay. And then he goes further. I'm not truly or fully in agreement with Fukuyama on this one, but the point is interesting, that he tells us that identity also has an issue related to legitimacy. We're accepting the rules of a community because that helps us into isothymia. Okay? He also links it with culture and values, and I think this is one of the issues in Romanian history curriculum throughout the classes, the grades. We're putting too little stress on culture and values, although they're very good, they're very significant. But also there are shared experiences that constitute an identity. So the points he makes is that diversity is a fact of life, even more so now. So therefore, there's a need for an inclusive national identity, although nation, as has been very poignantly presented in the last 2 days, tends to be isolating and uniform. So he argues for an inclusive national identity. He doesn't debate what nation is, which is a fault, I think. So, but this identity helps to what he says. There is need for national identity because it gives us that physical security, quality of government, economic development, widening the radius of trust. If you're, as a country, are comfortable, you can irradiate trust. Okay, you can accept diversity of other countries. It helps maintaining social safety nets because there is solidarity, part of the national identity, and fundamentally makes liberal democracy possible. Of course, he ends up, because I said I wanted to be very short, he ends up pointing at a confusion that exists about identity. And I fully agree with him. We can't escape the issue of identity because it is inbuilt. It's almost hardwired in our brain to have an identity, to have a personal self. It's one of the conditions it's part of the human condition. But he tells us also something very important, and I'll go back to the other one. That identities are not fixed. They're not given by accidents. Part of the identity, at least, is accepted and developed by us. It's a construct. We agree during our life to create a specific identity. It's because I was born in a place doesn't give me automatically a certain identity. I grow into it. Okay, and I think it is important. So identity, to bring it what Fukuyama tells us, links individual psyche with collective images of self. Is value laden. It has a weight of values. Okay, is narrative. because it's developed and there are stories behind it. And also manifests in terms of thinking and imagining, like the borderlands. Okay? And it does that negotiating the past with the present. That's my take on Fukuyama's text. I might be wrong. But Fukuyama is a philosopher of history, a politician, political philosophist. I'm going to a writer who has a very, like Edward Said, a very diverse personal history. Amin Malouf is a Christian Lebanese living in France. Okay, he comes from a let's say, perceived country as Muslim, but he's a Christian. And this gives him a specific sensitivity to such issues as identity. And that's why I took him. He starts somehow saying something I think very important, that we're usually thinking, individuals and sometimes ourselves, in terms of a dominant, always dominant, singular identity. And he disagrees with that. He says that our problem is that taking the line of least resistance, we lump the most different people together under the same heading. Taking the line of least resistance, we ascribe to them collective crimes, collective acts and opinions. For it is often the way we look at other people that imprisons them within their own narrowest allegiances. What does it actually mean? What it tells us is that, and I think neuroscience demonstrates he had a point in that. Because the reality is so complex, we make stereotypes. We lump together in order to process the information. And this is where error comes in. He doesn't use, for this neurosciences approach, Johnson Laird has that book, How We Reason, which is wonderful. He says that. And he goes, somehow it's written, this text is written before Fukuyama. But they go very well together. It is important that he states the fact that identity changes throughout our lives. As we add personal experiences, personal contacts, something in us changes, called life experience. Okay. But then he goes further than Fukuyama, and he says, which is very important, what determines a person's affiliation to a given group is essentially the influence of others. What he tells us here is that identity, even our very private, intimate identity, is the result of a certain dialogue. It's dialogical. It's not only within us and nobody else cares. No. Our personal experiences, which are communication experiences, make that the viewpoints of others modify something within us. And the idea of lumping together people is close to that. Each one of us has to make his way while choosing between the paths that are urged upon him and those that are forbidden. So the choices the people around us make, the opportunities they give us or don't, shape our personal identity. So to sum up, because I want to keep in time. Finally, if you look at these two, and the literature is huge, I just chosen subjectively, based on my identity, these two authors. So identity is about personal feelings, public recognition. It's about belonging, and Stefan made a very good point yesterday about belonging, how important actually belonging is. Thank you, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you too.
It's about collective standards and perspective, and Slobodan made a very good demonstration of that. A process of becoming, of development. Okay. It's dialogic, as I said before. It's made up of interactions. We might not use actually words, but even the posture of a body. Why cultures are differentiated by the distance between people who talk. In Western tradition, you have to have a certain distance. In Eastern societies, you have to be close as a sign of friendship. So there are a lot of even such small details as why aren't you in Near Eastern countries allowed to use your left hand? Because it is impure. An airport employee won't take your passport if you give it with your left hand, because it's not acceptable. It's negotiated. We select things. We do a hierarchy in the selection. And this negotiating goes with the past, with our experiences, and how we perceive the world around us. Okay, this was the theoretical. I'll look after that at the issue of identity in the Romanian curriculum, starting from this. A brief parenthesis. I think that good teaching asks also for an epistemology, for a good theoretical outlook on the subject. It's not just about being good practitioners. It's also about why we're doing things, how does it fit in a larger scheme of creating a new generation of mobile, intellectually mobile young men and women. So that's why I'm always starting with theory. The national curriculum. It doesn't, at the level of competences, and again, they are let's say, the organizing principle. I took the national curriculum for lower secondary, because the upper secondary, the high school, is under construction. So I took something that is a clarified document. In that document, there is a small phrase telling exactly that, and I'm pretty sure I'm quoting it correctly. Element of contents are orientative, competencies are compulsory. That means we're starting our teaching, we're choosing our strategies going from this statement. I took only the ones who would be relevant for a teaching approach related to identity are general key competences 2 and 3. The first 2 statements, critical and reflexive use of specialized language and of historical sources, and demonstrating civic behavior by means of historical experiences and social and cultural diversity. It's exactly what Fukuyama and Maloof told us. And then specific competences, the stepping stones throughout the school years. And we see that somehow we can tackle issues of identity under all headings. It depends, it's our responsibility to identify, to make the link between what we want to teach, in this case identity, and what is stated, because that curriculum is large enough, is flexible enough to allow us to do whatever we want, what is best. The best negotiation between student interests and our professional beliefs. Okay. This is quite clearly, if we think that identity is negotiated, it develops in time, is contextualized, is the result of dialogue, all of this is related to that. On the other hand, in terms of content, of actually information, there's quite little things that explicitly, now coming to Transylvania, that explicitly relate to Transylvanian history, which is quite interesting. Okay, it's cultural diversity in the Romanian world, and I translated as close to the Romanian text. Transylvania wasn't actually a Romanian world, but that's the phrasing because it relates to the Middle Ages. Okay? During the Middle Ages, the Romanian quality of Transylvania is a matter of discussion. And also, Brașov and Cluj were German or Hungarian. Scott told us yesterday about sundown laws. We had that also in Transylvania, in Hermannstadt, in Sibiu, and in Brașov, in Kronstadt. So, okay. Then Sarmizegetusa, the Dacian capital, which also is not Romanian, but it's part of the narrative of our identity. It was an intellectual decision to trace something back. Okay? And Sarmizegetusa in itself, like any other topic, is not explanatory in itself. It becomes explanatory when we make a story around it, when we become, again, like identity narrative. Okay? Enlightenment and Reform, Transylvania under the Habsburgs, the Suplex Libellus Parahorum, late 18th century, and way off in the 8th grade, national minorities in interbellum Romania. These are explicit topics. But then again, it's our job to find opportunities in other topics. So Transylvania doesn't seem to be that, let's say, visible, which is interesting. Okay. Maybe because, and I'm a little bit of a heretic here, Transylvania is a problem of definition. Or to be more precise, the cultural use of the word Transylvania is a problem of definition. Okay? Because Transylvania had a very variable surface, to say the least. First of all, so it's not clear throughout its history what Transylvania actually meant. Second, also in terms of administrative subordination, also it has a very dynamic history, a very dynamic past. It wasn't a fixed past. In terms of internal structure, there is a diversity that qualifies Transylvania as a borderland, as Raoul demonstrated today. But what is, from the curriculum viewpoint, the problem is the least coverage given to the diversity of inhabitants. So the cultural mosaic of Transylvania, which gives its identity, is basically absent. And that is, I would say, one of the great issues of history teaching in Romania. We tend to be more on the political side of history rather than cultural developments. Or okay. The problem, and I'm not sure how we can escape that. The problem is that we're using a geographical term, Transylvania, which is also not accepted throughout. We archaeologists tend to use the word Carpathian Basin, because culture, in prehistory at least, that were in Transylvania had the tendency to go also into Pannonia. It makes much more sense for an archaeologist to speak in terms of Carpathian Basin, which is a correct geographical term, instead of Transylvania, which is a cultural construct. Okay? At least for a huge period of time, Transylvania was not Italy. It was part of networks, of cultural networks going from the Baltic Sea to the Aegean. So it's not that simple. Okay, so, but anyhow, we use a term that would be geographical to qualify human cultural experiences, which is a point of crisis, actually. Okay. So, what I think is that we lose the diversity of human experiences in the battle with the grand narrative. But again, if what I've told about identity is correct, our students do not feel any relations with history, because it doesn't involve individual experiences. So, what can be done? Translating collective narratives into individual experiences, working from sources, and transforming historical monologue into a dialogue. And how can we do that? A couple of years ago, I was to the City Museum in Sibiu and found this nice statue, the statue of a knight, which is studded. This is the postament, the plinth, or how do you call it? Okay. It's actually wood in which small studs were hammered. Very interesting. A close-up. And what is called, the process is called nagelung, hammering nails. Hammering nails. And the archetypal nagelung is the so-called knight in Vienna. What is it actually with this nagelung? During 1916, there was a very interesting propaganda tool in Germany and Austria-Hungary. Artists built such knights, exhibited them mostly in board or in regions in which there was multi-ethnicity. And locals could buy those nails, okay, and hammer them. The funding was for widows of war and so forth. But it was a way of re-establishing publicly identity. So each nail in this knight represents a family or an individual who felt the need to participate in this public demonstration of identity finally. And we have, in some cases, that's why the close-up, in some cases like here, if you paid more, positional good, you could have your name inscribed. Okay? And there are Hungarians, there are Germans, there are some Romanians. Okay, so identity is also something of personal engagement. Okay? You could write your name, and it's interesting, it's in various regions, sometimes quite amusing. This is the so-called Iron Man in Wieselburg. Okay? The story is that actually the one who posed for the monument was a French prisoner. It wasn't a German soldier. From where does come this nagel? Actually, it's a very old tradition. It's medieval. This is the nagel tree in Vienna. It's still there. Journeymen, when they left for another shop from Vienna, put a nail in this tree in order to nail down any bad luck. Okay? It's also even earlier because we have in ancient sources this nagelung as a thaumaturgic, Germanic. So what does the propaganda is to reinvent a medieval tradition, to use it as an identity. Okay? But again, the important thing is that it is individual. So each nail is a person, someone who says, I'm identifying with that. Okay? Because otherwise, national identity is something very abstract. It's not the only case. We have in Timișoara and in Arad such nagel trees. In Timișoara, it's still there. In Arad, it has been lost. It was here. Okay. So it's a larger phenomenon. Okay, and this shows us that communities are important. How much do I? 5 minutes? Okay, that might be a very. Let's look at the history of a person. And what follows is part of a personal archive who was actually thrown away. Quite sad, actually. I bought it from the antiquarian because I found it unacceptable. I'm an archaeologist. I'm not specializing in World War I, but nevertheless. So I found a set of photographs and documents related to this person, Jan Komonic. He's in a uniform of Serbian hussars, because Romanians didn't have national units. They were the only ones. They were considered not to be so sure. So nevertheless, he's in the uniform of Serbian hussars. He's in the war, World War One. Various moments of timeout, let's say, by the lake, doing a barbecue. We know that, and they're very diverse ethnic. The best sign of the diversity and in his personal destinies, he's at one point before the war, he's sick, and the colleagues from the regiment sent him a greeting card. Unsigned. You have Germans, you have Jews, you have Hungarians, one or two Romanians. It's very interesting to see the diversity, and the fact that this diversity, he was very well accepted among them, does not change his identity. What's he actually doing? I was interested in this person because he was a forestry engineer. Okay, he was a forestry. My mother worked in the forestry, and so he was in Galicia somewhere. And I thought he's on the front. No, he's not on the front. He's in the staff of a prisoner's camp. This is going. Okay, mostly with Russian prisoners. You have also a kid. It's a very interesting, because talking about identity it is helpful, because this is a very strange photograph. You have two officers photographing themselves with exhibits. They're chosen for their alterity, for being so different. Okay. That raises the question, to what identities was Ioan Comăniciu exposed? Even more so because in that concentration camp, you have also Romanian prisoners. So he, as an Austrian-Hungarian officer of hussars, he has to guard Romanian prisoners, which is quite difficult, even more so. Okay? He only after World War I, he finds out he has a cousin who at the time of the war was on the other side of the front. Okay? So identities are very difficult, very diverse things. They're not, okay. I'll pass over several other things. What is interesting is I find him remobilized during World War II, and unfortunately I forgot to bring that photo. I have a photo of him, probably in 1943, with his son in a military uniform, Romanian army, and between them, the map of Romania without Transylvania. So you can teach issues of identity, of history, starting from one person, because this is important. Students, especially smaller ones, can relate easier emotionally with one person than with 60,000 or 200,000 people who went dead during World War I. Okay, so the takeaways. Keep it simple. Don't try to be too theoretical, too broad. Take small cases. Work solely from sources. Let the sources, don't tell them the things US adults. Let the sources tell them the story. Question not only facts, but also emotion. This is important. How would they have felt? What would they have said? This is very important, because the brain of students goes on and on. It never stops, actually. They might seem not to do that, but they do. Allow for controversy. It's not always like we like it. So it's important. focus on change and readjustments. Evolving allegiances are important. Go to individual experiences. I hope I didn't. Was it okay?
Thank you very much, Carol. Thank you, Carol, for outlining the theoretical problem, some wonderful examples, and how that can be applied within the curriculum.
The entire archive cost me somewhere under 50 euros because the people didn't know what they actually had. And they were ready to throw them to the garbage. I said, no, I'll buy it. We all find ourselves in such situation. I think it's a worthwhile investment, because if they see a real photo in the age of YouTube, it means a lot to them. Sir.
So we'll take questions direct in a moment, but the first thing I would like to ask is, identity is of enduring importance, phase after phase of history, but at the moment it seems ever more important. Why do you think that's the case?
I think that identity becomes more and more important because there is also an informational overload. Because although many people seem not to care, I think that a lot of people are stressed by the issue of fake news, of post-truth, because these are things you can't work with actually. With negative definitions, it's very difficult to work. So they need a fixed point, and the only one they really have is themselves. So identity, who am I, becomes, how would I say, a survival kit. And you take that identity that comes with the cheapest price, which sometimes, unfortunately, tends to be mob identity. I think this is the problem, because very few people think of identity in terms of Malouf as a dialogue, as the things that other people make us do and shape our identity. I think that Malouf goes better and further than Fukuyama.
That's really interesting. There's a famous book which many of you will know, Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, and it was about the way that media, he was writing actually about Southeast Asia, but lots of general principles apply about how the media and developments in the media help to shape environment where you've got mass newspapers and so forth. And of course we're living in a new media age, as you say, overloaded with information, but also, somebody mentioned, was it you, Raoul? Or no, someone else, I think the Netflix effect on identity.
Yeah.
So this is a new aspect.
And it's interesting the fact that also Edward Said, who has also such a mixed identity, a personal identity like Malouf, but also Benedict Anderson, Edward Said are not historians. They're specializing in literary theory and history. So one of the recommendations would be to use literature. It's difficult, it's not easy, but literature as a subjective testimonial can give a good starting point when debating complex issues like history of Transylvania.
There's another point as well as to why identity, and thus the way it's incorporated in our history teaching, matters more and more across many countries. It might be typified by two different quotations from the United States. Back in the 1990s, when thinking about what really mattered in politics, President Clinton said, "It's the economy, stupid." That's what really, really mattered. Now, a contrasting comment from a few years ago is politics is downstream from culture. Politics is downstream from culture. That's from Steve Bannon, one of the main architects of the MAGA movement. So we've got a shift there, and one of the points about identity, there is the history of the importance of identity itself.
The result was the entire American debate on the history wars.
Yeah. So why we're thinking about this and how important it is in our history classes, when we started our careers, history was slightly in a sense on the defensive as to why it mattered in a technocratic and economic-driven world. Now, in an era where identity politics are so much more salient in so many countries, history and historical understanding, what we're here to do, matters so much more. Anyway, thank you very much. And questions from the floor, or observations or points. Scott, your
No, I was just holding my.
yeah, right.
I've got a million questions. Let's not make the chat, but a few points. I really like the notion of teaching identity from one person, and from basically starting from the sources and my fear is that, and it's a genuine concern I have in my teaching as well. Yes, history is fragmentary. Yes, history is chaotic. The archival record is a mess, and it's never a straight line. But history, the way it used to be taught, made, and we as historians, we do put order in the mess. That's true. Ordering the chaos is our job. And I'm wondering the extent, the point at which a young student, a very young student, starts from this messiness of history, wouldn't be even more confusing in terms of precisely in the context of information overload, wouldn't it be reproducing the bombarding of stuff on social media? That's one question. And the other goes more, I think one important qualification I would make to both Maluf and Fukuyama, and one I can't emphasize enough, and I think it's also very important in education, and something I've tried to teach in the course of my career. Identity is highly situational.
Yeah.
We have multiple identities, as Slobodan was saying, all of us do. I mean, you're Romanian, but you're also a history teacher. I'm a metalhead. I listen to that kind of music, and if I was in, and if I went to the Metallica concert in Bucharest 2 days ago, I would wear different clothes than the ones I wear here. If I go to a football game, I wear the T-shirt of my favorite team, not of Metallica. Sure. And when I go to I feel Roma, and when I'm in my Roma activist institutions, groups, I am exclusively Roma because that's the only part of my identity that they care about. But if I go to the airport and show a passport, I'll show the Romanian one. Identities matter. Our situation matter in different contexts, and I think this might be a vaccine against the identity politics of the present, to some extent.
First question, yes, you're right. The risk of making history trivial is significant. What I want to say is that because there's one fundamental difference between research and teaching. It's the time scale. I have a very narrow time span, and time is the critical resource in teaching, in secondary education. Okay, so everything has to follow that Procrustean bent, which is the time. So what I wanted actually to say is that we should find exemplars. There are some critical points in which 2 or 3 times during a year we can do something like that. Mm-hmm. You don't need much. This is one thing. Second, history teaching is not about creating identity. History is about making students question, being aware of exactly that diversity, of the fact that they change. Okay? Not about me, the history teacher, telling them their identity. No, just giving them the incentive to see the diversity of situation, exactly to understand what it means to have a T-shirt, to go to Metallica, to be in an NGO, and so forth, being at the same time the same person. Yeah, okay, but the problem is when you're talking with students in the present and about present situation, the emotional load can be very hard. So one of the things you can do is to push back some of the topics because the past is a foreign country and is not that emotionally laden. You, as a history teacher, can manage easier emotional response. Okay, that's why. So you can't teach all the time like that. It's suicidal for everybody. But in certain points, just to show students that there's another type of history. Okay, that's. Thank you very much for it.
Thank you. Now, one of the things, hate to put people on the spot, but we had a very interesting conversation over coffee about the way in which we need to interrogate our students about their attitudes to borders and identity. I was just wondering whether we could have a contribution from the video.
So we were sharing here earlier how sometimes, for example, we try to prepare our students whether they go on a project or something like that, perhaps a trip, and then we have to make clear to them these are the rules where we're going. We need to follow those, and sometimes I think Alexandra can tell you more about that. We have perhaps a harder time to explain to them why they cannot rely on the rules they know and the rights they have here or in Europe when we go to, I don't know, perhaps Turkey or some other space where these are not to be taken for granted, because then things might happen which are less pleasant.
Because sometimes they have this yes, but we're tourists. We should be allowed to do how we feel because we're tourists there. And there's this issue of explaining them, yes, we're tourists, but we have to respect the laws and the culture of that country. And sometimes they are different than our culture and our country. So sometimes, and even Turkey, which is somewhere where we normally go for exchanges with students, and it's not quite that different, but there are still some differences which they should be made aware before the trip, and then it can be quite challenging for some of them. Maybe they're on their first trip outside of the country, it's their first experience going somewhere that's different, and sometimes we do have issues. Why? The constant question that the teenager asks.
But I think their generation is experiencing a smoothening of borders and of difficult experiences in general, which we see in AI, how it smoothens out all asperities, and somehow we need to remind them or explain those to them, because we have lived them. For example, we know what it means to cross a hard border and wait for hours and stuff, but to them it's very foreign.
If you ask them about their identity, what do you think they would say? And would it be different from what you might say?
For sure.
In what way?
Well, I was born during the Cold War. That part will never leave, I guess. And I imagine for the rest of us who are in the same situation, we're more sensitive and we're triggered by certain things that happen, and they encroach our freedom, or they suddenly remind us that some identities are better than others or worthier than others, perhaps. And then again, we have some separations that, it's within, it's inside what's happening or what's important, it's desirable, and, behind the curtain, so to say.
I let you in a second. Just want to draw out, I think, a very important point from this, is that in so many ways when you're teaching in a school, we're always thinking of teaching our subjects, of course, but actually we need to switch that round a bit. We're teaching our students. And we have to understand where they're coming from, what their assumptions are, and there are generational differences. And as well as talking about, the salience of economics as against identity, we're in an age where there are very, perhaps bigger generational differences than there have been in the past. And we need to take those into account. And that's where the rigidity of the curriculum often gets in the way. Take one more point and then come back to you, Karen.
Yeah, I was just, thinking about taking the thread from that idea. I see this with my students, and as we talk, I am teaching European integration, for instance, and you see that their identity is very much social media based. They have a global identity, meaning that they can relate to other, to their generations all over the world, meaning that ultimately, meaning that they, it's about lifestyle, it's about choices, it may be about fashion, about cuisine and stuff like that, and on top of that, they add a layer of national identity. That's what makes me special in a world where everybody behaves the same, more or less, has the same options more or less, but generally speaking they feel comfortable by and with identifying elements of lifestyle which are by now universal. From the United States to Western Europe to Russia yesterday, or to China or Japan, they would be able to find themselves in a world which is still familiar. When it comes to being something more, that's the moment when they get back to what they call traditions. And they feel proud to be Romanian, but otherwise they are global in many ways. So suddenly when they want to add an extra layer of identity, they embrace the ethnic cultural one that is the most, is closer to them. So it's interesting, and this varies. I definitely cannot use the same cultural references my generation was used to. It's not easy.
I just wanted to, indeed, there's a generation issue, but I can guarantee that your experience of living in the Cold War is quite different from my experience. It doesn't make that mine or yours is better, it's just different. And students should understand differences. That's just one. And I, as a prehistorian, I have sometimes problems trying to explain them societies that tend to be conservative. So I have always to ask them what do they understand through a proper Christmas dinner. And then I quote them from Kogolnichano's cookbook in mid-19th century. It's basically the same. Sorry, please.
So one comment about it. I actually find that highly teachable, and I find them to be highly interested in my experience during the Cold War. Because I'm a historical object to them, right, at that moment. And whatever the topic was, whenever I started mentioning my childhood in socialist Romania, that was super interesting. It's doubly foreign to them because it's yes the past, but it's also the Irish, so they didn't have communism. And again, I find it a way to teach about the Cold War, but also to teach about the shifting conditions of culture and how the past is a foreign country via the means of Exhibit A. Myself, I'll talk to you about this. I taught a survey course on revolutions, for example. And the point of the course was not even for them to know about revolutions, but to learn about different sources. If you look at the French Revolution, you've got written sources, you've got paintings. You go a bit further, in 1830 you already have a photograph. 1848 you certainly have photographs. You move on, Russian Revolution, you have moving pictures, you have film. You have graffiti for 68 in Paris. You have television, you have radio. And then the last one was 1989, where I said, well, you have living oral testimony. That's a source as well. And I can tell you about the Romanian Revolution through the eyes of a 12-year-old. But it's again, I think yes, the difference makes it problematic for us to know how to appeal to them. But our experience, my experience, is appealing to them because it's different, because it's foreign, because it's something that even a Gen Zer used to TikTok will follow if you invest in sort of like just making it personal.
A brief disclosure. I talked about emotions because initially I wanted to relate, to make a debate on identity and two very complex, very difficult words, triumph and tragedy. How this play in identity, but I decided it's better not. So it's a talk in itself.
Now, one of the points that Carol made was that it's a positively good thing, sort of pedagogically, to teach sensitive histories, because you immediately get greater sort of mobilisation of interest and engagement from students. Yes?
I had a little comment regarding the global identity, because when teaching the history of Holocaust, I actually do that exercise with my students. When I ask them to pick 7 or 10 identities, and they say, I'm Romanian, I'm Christian, I'm a sportsman, I'm a son. And after that, in the context of talking about how some people had to give up their identity, I told them to choose from those identities. And most of the times, the national identity is not in the last or the most important 3 that are left. they usually identify with what they like or with their family, not much with the national identity or the religion.
It's all on the scale of their life experience. Nation is something actually very abstract for them, even for us, I mean. So, let's look at the parliament. They clearly is abstract for them. Sorry for the comment, but very good exercise. Very good exercise, making them to make choices because they start working on criteria. What are the roots of these criteria? Very, 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 very. Thank you.
Just something very, very short. It's very strange what you said because I teach young and a bit older students, and I noticed that yes, they might identify as somebody totally different from TikTok, social media, but when it came to elections, they went to their families, and their choices were they followed the steps in their families. So it was very strange. Not good. Not good. Most of them not good. I was surprised to notice this. I mean, yes, they follow TikTok, they follow Insta, they have a lot of people, but when it came to, okay, but why is your choice? Why do you choose the way you choose? And I noticed ideas from families, and I asked, my father said it, in my family people listen to this television or something else. So it was a paradox somehow.
But it demonstrates also that we should look at our younger students as personalities within circles. Okay, that move like electrons around the nucleus. Okay, so that would be an interesting theoretical model.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's hope. If this is there's hope.
I think on that note, there's hope. We will conclude with many thanks to Carol.
Thank you
very much.